This guy's a really cool accent, by the way. Sound and the, okay, sweet. Cool. So does everybody take Latin here? Or is it Latin 2 years? Is that how it works now?
Yeah, we're 4 if they
Back in my, 4? Wow, kudos to all of you. Back in my day, when I was in Stella, we took Spanish. Spanish is cool. Take Spanish now.
But not as cool as Latin.
Latin is pretty sweet. Do they do the Pledge of Allegiance in Latin? That was honestly, I felt very patriotic whenever I did that. Sweet.
Doctors recommend that everyone should take part in some form of exercise every week. This is even more important for people with haemophilia, as exercise strengthens the muscles and helps protect the joints from a bleed. Exercise can also help to reduce the damage to joints when bleeds have occurred. A joint is formed where the ends of 2 bones meet. For example, the thigh bone and the lower leg bones meet to form the knee joint. In a healthy knee joint, the ends of the bones are coated in smooth, slippery tissue called articular cartilage. The cartilage covers and cushions the bones, acting as a shock absorber, allowing the joint to move smoothly and easily. As the joint moves, the cartilage is squashed, then bounces back when the joint stops moving. The joint is also surrounded by synovium, a tough membrane or capsule which produces a liquid called synovial fluid that lubricates and helps to reduce wear and tear on the joint. Tendon and muscles attached to the bones power the joint, making it able to move. All these parts of the joint work together to make sure the joint is held together when
He kind of gets off track a little bit. Okay. So basically right there what he was saying, he's talking about the joints and how, oh wow, I went to the same exact spot. He's talking about how right now he's just describing the joint, and then he'll go in later and talk about the joint bleeding that I was talking about. And this is just a really cool cartoon.
As we've heard, when someone has haemophilia, they can bleed not only from cuts, but also from a muscle or into a joint. This can happen if they hurt themselves, but often it happens on its own, without any kind of injury for those with severe haemophilia. People with haemophilia may bleed into any joint, but the elbows, knees and ankles are most often affected. If bleeding happens repeatedly into a single joint, called a target joint, it can cause serious damage to the joint. One of the reasons why joint bleeding is so common in people with haemophilia is the large number of blood vessels in the synovium.
My favorite part.
A bleed can result from the joint pinching the synovial membrane during movement, which breaks the blood vessels within it. The bleeding is initially confined to the synovium and then extends into the fluid within the joint space. Bleeding into joints is much more serious than bleeding from a cut, as it's often difficult to tell that a bleed has started. In the early stages of a bleed, there may not be any outward signs that it's taking place, but the person may feel a bubbling or tingling feeling. As the bleed progresses, the joint may begin to feel warm, and the joint movement becomes more restricted. As the bleed continues, more blood enters the joint space and the synovial membrane begins to stretch, causing the joint to swell. With such an advanced bleed, the stretching of the synovial membrane makes the joint feel hot, swollen and very painful. Finally, the amount of blood in the joint prevents it moving at all, and it becomes fixed in an unusual position. Giving an injection of factor will stop any more bleeding into the joint within minutes by telling the blood to start clotting. Although injection of factor stops the bleeding, it doesn't remove the blood that has already collected. Instead, it's thought that the blood is gradually broken down by enzymes released by the synovium and is slowly reabsorbed by the synovial membrane over time. If factor is given early, the bleeding will stop quickly and the joint will feel better within a day or two. However, if factor is given later, when more blood has collected, it will take several days for the blood to go and for the joint to start working normally again. Once the blood has been removed, there may be few noticeable signs in the short term that it's occurred. But every time a bleed happens, it damages the joint, as the enzymes that break the blood down also cause the synovium to become inflamed and swollen. The thicker the synovium becomes, the more blood vessels it contains, and the more likely it is to bleed. The activity of the enzymes also causes changes to the smooth cartilage that lines the ends of the bone. So,
anything else that's pretty good? No, I think that's it. So, did that make sense to everybody what he was talking about? Grant, what did you think? Hate to put you on the spot, but I'm fine with it, really. Awesome. Howard. Man, I could never be good at this whole... Anyways, okay. So, what he was saying about the synovium, he kind of got, he liked that word a lot, so he talked about that one a lot. But mainly you could see what happens, like even a simple, I know the whole thing where the guy was just bouncing the ball on his knee was very repetitive, but that's actually accurate. Like, hemophiliacs can just randomly suddenly break out and start bleeding into their joints. And they, as you can see, the guy, he kind of didn't really know what was up. I know it's a cartoon I'm talking about, but it's, it's accurate. But like they can spontaneously, they can just be walking and then all of a sudden start having a joint in their knee, and they can't really feel it until a little bit later. And hopefully, you can see she was injecting the clotting factor into him. So what I was talking about earlier in the factor 8 and factor 9 deficiencies, doctors have that factor 8 and factor 9, and they can inject it into the hemophiliac patients. That's what they have to inject themselves with every time they have a bleed. But the only problem is that the body views it as a foreign object in the body, so their own body starts attacking what's good for them. So eventually they'll develop antibodies to block out the factor 8 and factor 9, so they have to have higher doses, and it's a lot harder to manage. So try, if this is a video I'm thinking of, oh shoot. Back. There we go. Have to be fast. Oh, there's it twice. So,
You think you can get a movie at the video store faster than Netflix? Let's race. 1, 2, 3, go. Congratulations, you lost.
Congratulations, you lost. That was weird. Anyways, this is a video of a guy. He has hemophilia, and he's a little bit older. We'll just watch a little bit of this, and then we'll go back to the slides. So,
my name is Randy Hale, and I live with hemophilia. When I was 18, I had sinus nose surgery, nearly bled to death. Everybody said, "Oh, it's nothing to worry about it, no big deal." Last year, I had minor sinus surgery, and 5 days after the event, I started bleeding. Really good. And they ran the tests, and they found out I was a hemophiliac. The worst part of the experience, except for maybe a little bit of the pain, was watching it happen through my wife's eyes. As we were driving to the emergency room in traffic, and I was bleeding to death in a bowl, the doctor called and said, "He's a hemophiliac. We have a treatment for it." Okay, so on the way to the hospital while I'm bleeding, we got the call about the diagnosis. And it turned out that there was only one drug that could treat that, which they did treat me with, which stopped the bleeding. From here on out, I have to wear my Media alert, which says what drug to treat me with. And any kind of surgery that I have in the future, they just have to treat it with this drug one time beforehand, and I'll be okay. The answer is my wife. She's been the number one supporter in all of this. Yeah, the three things that I think about every day are, one is, a better vegetable diet, leafy greens, that sort of thing. Telling the physician before anything happens that I'm a hemophiliac. Psychologically, taking it easier since this happened. I planted a garden. I never understood gardens like this. Well, I would say don't stress out. I would say try and relax with it. Because it's part of you, and, you know, the stress and such will make it worse.
Maybe I'll start a garden. But you can see that, I mean, that was kind of an extreme. Like, he didn't know about it until much later. And, I mean, you heard going to the hospital almost bleeding to death. That'd be an experience. But most, and the drug he was talking about, that's a new drug that they've started to do, but it's only short term. Right now, the factor 8 and factor 9, that's mainly just, I mean, it sounded like his was pretty serious, like he was bleeding to death, so that was a drug that they need to try out. It can be managed through clotting factor replacement therapy. That's what we were talking about when they have to inject themselves with the clotting factor. Why no cure?